Welcome back. My name is Parsa. I'm a medical student with nearly a decade of investing experience in stocks and real estate, and today I'm going to be talking about Novo Nordisk. Now, last night I posted something on my Twitter showing how Eli Lilly has had an absolute tear of a year, while Novo Nordisk, seemingly at its direct expense, has had a terrible downfall. This is a chart showing the market cap of each one of these stocks over the past few years, and we see that Eli Lilly is trading at a much higher multiple, even though the revenues are practically the same. And I was curious, what is the main driving factor for this? I know both of them are involved in weight loss, and I wanted to look into that a bit further. Now, something to just throw out there before we begin, there has been a lot of recent breakthroughs and news articles coming out about Novo Nordisk that make me a bit more excited about covering this company now, particularly with their first oral medication for weight loss, as well as some press releases regarding rulings in China. This one's less relevant, but we'll get into that a bit later on. Now, having a look at their Q3 results from November, we see they had okay growth. There's some key takeaways here, though. We can see that their diabetes market share has been going down, which is a point that we'll be covering a little bit more in depth. But there are some good drugs in development, and we'll be talking about that a bit more in depth as well. Now, having a look at what Novo Nordisk kind of revolves around, their main focus nowadays comes down to obesity. If you've heard of the drug called Ozempic or Wegovy, there's a couple different names for it. Semaglutide is the generic name for it. But overall, their obesity and diabetes focuses are the mainstay of what their actual business revolves around and where their growth is going to come in the future. A few things to keep in mind also is that they highlight there's a significant unmet need still in these markets. In my experience, I've even seen in our lectures that they've talked about how one of the main barriers remaining for these obesity treatments is the cost. And that's something that's been coming down a lot. If we look at the oral pill that they've brought forward, not only is this weight loss quite significant that we see at 16.6%, I'll go in more depth about this later, but the cost that they're expecting this to come in at is around $150 per month, which is a lot lower than the low thousands that we were looking at maybe a year or two ago. Now, coming back to it, one thing we have to highlight is that a major percentage of their revenue comes from the US market. That's typical for most drug companies, but in this case, it's significant because a lot of different jurisdictions are losing their patents for these GLP-1s in 2026, notably India, China, Brazil, Turkey, Canada. There's several countries that are losing this patent, but although that could be a bit of a difficulty for the growth of the company moving forward, it's not as large of a percentage of the entire market. We see the entire EU and Canada portion not even being half of the US market, China not being anywhere significant compared to the US market. The main story kind of revolves around the US market. Looking at the US market, though, we see the main reason why Eli Lilly has been tearing recently compared to Novo Nordisk. The market share originally was predominantly in favor of Novo Nordisk with their Ozempic. They were the first movers in the market. They had the largest market share, but we see that in the past year, Eli Lilly has continued to grow. I think the growth rate was around 50-something%, whereas Novo has been a bit more flat and they've been around that 10% mark. The main reason why they're losing market share is because Eli Lilly has a combination therapy that they've been marketing and that has a higher percentage of weight loss for the average patient. Now, when it comes to prescribing this medication, we see that doctors are using this as the key performance indicator for these drugs. And this is the main metric that we need to look at when comparing these drugs. When we look at Wegovy, the mean weight loss is high teens range compared to the high teens to low 20s range for the combination therapy that Eli Lilly markets. There's several other charts kind of showing how the anti-obesity drugs, again, the same story of the total addressable market growing, the market overall growing, it predominantly being between Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, but within those, Novo's had a much harder time growing the number of scripts being written out for their medications compared to Eli Lilly because of that increased efficacy we see. Their cost was historically around the same, and so that's been a main driver of that growth. Now, when we look back over at the oral medication, we can see that not only is it a once-a-day pill, it's also something that has that same high teens efficacy, which is massive because not only are they bringing down the cost, but they're getting nearly the same efficacy. And that element of having to administer these medications yourself through an injection was a major barrier for a lot of people. A lot of people have a fear of needles. A lot of people don't want to be doing their injections themselves. And that's a massive barrier that we don't have to kind of face anymore. Notably, I'll be talking about a little bit more later about how Eli Lilly has their own oral pills coming out. I think that comes out mid next year, but still, I'd also like to bring your attention to the pipeline that Novo Nordisk has developing drugs. In their obesity care, we have Cagrilintide, which has a different mechanism of action compared to semaglutide or Wegovy. Now, the main reason why that's important is because that allows for them to develop their own combination therapies. One thing we can see is that the preliminary results for Cagrilintide show that it is effective on its own, better than placebo. It is showing promising results, but it's also been shown preliminarily to be safe alone and in combination with semaglutide, as well as because of that different mechanism of action, it has greater weight loss than just each one of these drugs on its own. And they're saying that it has better efficacy than anything that's currently approved. That could be a massive room for them to kind of take back that market share that they've been losing recently. Another drug I'd like to highlight from this pipeline is the oral Amycretin drug that they've been developing. They're expected to start that phase 3 in the first half of 2026. This is the oral combination therapy for the semaglutide and the Cagrilintide. The reason why this is important because, again, them having an oral treatment removes some of the barriers to entry that are seen with the injections we currently have, and them being a first mover in this space allows for them to take back that market share. And seemingly the early results are showing that they've been quite effective in not only converting their monotherapies into a combination therapy, but also taking these subcutaneous injections and taking them into the oral administration and still having good efficacy. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's have a deeper look at Eli Lilly. They're expected to continue growing at quite a fast rate. The projections by analysts are pretty good for them. I think they're looking at around 20% growth in 2026. Not as fast as the 50% that they've had in the past years, but still good. Now, one point I want to address is that while the total addressable market has been growing, we can see that the share that their anti-obesity drugs have been having have started to decline a slight bit. So they're not seemingly continuing to take over the entirety of the market. That's one point to keep in mind. Another point to keep in mind, kind of in favor of Eli Lilly, is that they have a massive drug development pipeline that, from my preliminary look at it and just at baseline, I kind of like to look at this a little bit more in the long run. I like how they have stuff in neurodegeneration, cancer treatment. I kind of want to look at these a little bit more. But overall, within the weight loss space, they have a couple of drugs that are nearing the end of their pipeline and might be approved in 2026. The one that's notable is this one, which is an oral GLP-1, similar to Wegovy, that they just made orally available and approved. The results have been posted, but they don't expect the approval to come in until 2026. And again, Novo Nordisk is the first mover in this market. I think in terms of efficacy, they're more or less in line. I'm really curious to see how the efficacy for the combination treatment of the Amycretin drug comes through. I think that could be a major determiner of who ends up ahead in 2026 and where the market share goes. I think the market's still going to continue growing for both players. I think they'll still have okay growth. The main question just comes down to which one's the better play for the 2026 year. And I'm slightly leaning towards Novo Nordisk as of right now, purely because of that first mover's advantage. So in summary, Eli Lilly has been raising guidance. They've been beating expectations. They've had faster growth. And so that's why we have a higher multiple associated with them, even at the same revenue. But a lot of this has come from taking market share from Novo Nordisk in the US space. That may not continue in 2026 with Novo Nordisk being ahead in their development and coming out with drugs that are already getting approved. Having those oral medications coming out months sooner could provide that opportunity for Novo to get back into a positive sentiment with investors, get that growth increasing again, start beating expectations. Another thing to keep in mind is that in international markets, we're going to see in 2026 the patents for GLP-1 drugs to expire, and that might be a secular headwind that affects both Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, which is not going to be as important considering how much of the growth is dependent on that US market and how much of that percentage of the revenue comes from the American market. But overall, something to keep in mind. I think for myself, I might be opening up a watcher position in Novo Nordisk. I do kind of like where it sits at the PE of 14. I think they could be taking some of that market share back, and that's a bit of a gamble. It's a bit riskier of a play than what I'd normally make, but it's something I might just open like a 1 to 2.5% position, see where it goes, potentially increase if I see the results from the first few quarters in 2026 showing that trajectory I like to see. But in the long run, I do also like Eli Lilly. I might be doing an even deeper dive into Eli Lilly, seeing what they have in the pipeline and see if it actually is as exciting as it looks from just first glance. I do kind of like the spaces that they're going into. I think they could get some possible returns from them in the long run there and have long-term growth. If the price of Eli Lilly also comes down from Novo taking back some of that market share, or at least the taking of market share slowing down, I could open up a Eli Lilly position. I do like the stock. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If there are any stocks you want to take a look at, either in the healthcare space or in the market as a whole, let me know. Love to hear back from you guys. I hope you guys have a good start to your year, and cheers. Take care.